Hey Tony, it's Friday, and first off, to answer your question of the week, we had a pretty low-key New Year's this year. Justice's sister was in town, so we ended up playing Dungeons and Doggos for a little bit until Des had to go to her hotel for the night, and then Taylor and I stayed up till 12:10, and then went to sleep. That was what we did. It wasn't particularly eventful, but it was enjoyable. And the sleep was great because I had the next day off, so I got to sleep in for the first time in a while. But otherwise, it was just kind of low key. Did some shopping on New Year's. Actually got a couple new shirts, couple new ties, which I didn't wear today, but I'm in court a couple times next week, so I'll probably be wearing that then. But what I want to talk about this week is geopolitical news. So I'm sure you've at least heard of what happened yesterday. So there was a big shakeup in the Middle East, in which, so we have to backtrack a little bit to earlier in the week. So the Middle East it's always a hotbed, but it's been particularly a hotbed this week. So earlier in the week, the U.S. embassy ended up under siege by an Iran-backed militia. So that took place a couple days ago, and then yesterday was huge events that shook the relationship between the U.S. and Iran. The United States ended up in a targeted drone strike, killing one of the top generals of Iran. In fact, he was the top general, and he was the commander of the elite regiment of the Revolutionary Guard, which is the elite of the elite of the Iranian military. So this is huge. Like, people are already calling for that it's gonna start World War III. I don't think that's going to happen because the world isn't prepared, and the world has a vested interest in avoiding a World War III.
You say that, honey, but I think that you're being a little optimistic at least.
I mean, I might be. What I do think it's going to happen, I don't think it's going to be a World War III, but it is going to lead to an increase in tensions with America and Iran.
Hello, gas prices going up.
Yeah, I mean, gas prices are going to go up, but that's the very, very most basic of all basic aspects of this development.
I know.
So the United States and Iran, I'll give a brief history of that, have had a very complicated history since about the 1950s. So before the 1950s and during World War II, Iran was an ally of America insofar as they were led by a monarch who was the Shah of Iran. Well, the Shah was a brutal tyrant, but he was a US-backed tyrant. And so what ended up happening is the Shah was overthrown, and Mohammad Mossadegh ended up taking the place and had the first Iranian Republic. So the U.S. was okay with this until he started nationalizing their oil, and that was a big no-no. So for some context on that, this was in the midst of the Cold War. As soon as he mentioned that he was nationalizing the oil, that had communism ring out in the ears of America's leaders at the time. And so there was a CIA-backed coup who overthrew the president and reinstalled the Shah, who continued to be a brutal tyrant. Well, in the 1970s, the Shah was effectively overthrown completely, and that's where we got the Islamic Republic we have now of Iran. So there's a lot of history between the U.S. and Iran, and to kind of be even less focused on Iran itself, the Middle East is a hotbed. It's been a hotbed for decades. In fact, it's been a hotbed for a century. So some of the background of why the Middle East is such a hotbed goes to the end of World War I. So in World War I, the Middle East was all controlled by the Ottoman Empire. They were a huge empire, but they dissolved shortly after World War I. Like, they were already a fragile state, and then their loss in World War I completely shattered the Ottoman Empire. And the allies, predominantly Britain and France, just marched in there and basically arbitrarily drew lines in the sand saying, okay, these are going to be this country, this is going to be that country, and it worked about as well as you would expect. The Middle East has, like, even taking out the unifying aspect of the Ottoman Empire, the Middle East is a land of 1 million different tribes of people, and all of them have differing views. What what Britain and France did is they didn't even care about that. They just arbitrarily drew lines in the sand saying, okay, this is going to be our territory, this is going to be your territory, and it had predictably bad results. Now, there are two main powers within the Middle East, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran is an ally of China and Russia, whereas Saudi Arabia is an ally of America. So a lot of what goes on within the Middle East is essentially a proxy war between America and our rivals and Iran and their rival Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on the different relationships between all the countries in the Middle East because that is a lecture in itself, and it's something that I'm admittedly not overwhelmingly knowledgeable about, but I have pretty serious concerns on what's going to happen in the future now in the Middle East. So people are comparing it to World War III because a lot of this lead up is very similar to the lead up to World War I, in which there was a mixture of nation states who all had differing views and differing goals within the Middle East, and resources were scarce then, they're even more scarce now. So there's a vested interest for the world to avoid a massive conflict, because the last massive conflict we had was World War II, which was the most catastrophic war that on this planet. It was a relatively short war, but it was catastrophic, with millions dead. And now when you throw in nuclear weapons, there's a vested interest to not have World War III, because, to use an old phrase from Einstein, I don't know what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Which is basically just a way of saying that if there's a World War III with our nuclear weapons, it'll be the war to end all wars, and humanity will die. I also think that's a little incorrect, because even if there is a World War III and the entire social order collapses on itself, I still think humanity will be able to survive, because there will be enough differing places where they were more or less untouched by the war. Like, the Fallout series is one example of a post-apocalyptic setting, but there are 1,000,001 different ones. And I think a lot of them are unnecessarily negative. But this is still a huge, huge, huge step in relations between America and Iran. So I don't know what's going to happen, and it's concerning. Now, you're already having some partisan infighting in which people are saying that this was a unlawful strike. In fact, the international community at large has been pretty unfavorable to this attack, and with relatively good reason. This throws dynamite into a powder room. So it's gonna be, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be something to pay attention to, because I think this is a watershed moment for the Middle East and America's spot in the Middle East. The Trump administration has been very inconsistent with what they want to do in the Middle East, with talks of wanting to pull out their troops, but then also escalating in different situations. I don't think there's a real competent plan, or even a full plan of steps 1, 2, and 3, which makes me concerned that we're going through the tearing down of the Middle East just like after World War I, which will only cause more and more infighting, more and more violence, and in the end, a less stable region and a less stable world. So Tony, my question for you is, what do you think is going to come of this? Tony, I'll see you on Tuesday. Later, bro.